Madam President, I rise today to address the question that's currently before the body here, and that's whether we should extend the emergency unemployment insurance for millions of Americans who are still unable to find work. This is in addition to the 26 weeks that's provided in most states, some a little more, some a little less. And the question is whether we extend this again, as we have done several times since the Great Recession. The question is, should we extend it, and if so, how should we extend it? Should we pay for it? Should there be some training or other requirements attached to it so that it works better? It's a good debate to have. I came on the floor yesterday to say, let's have a full debate on this issue. It's one of great importance to folks who are unemployed. It's also important to our nation as a whole that we deal with this issue to encourage economic growth, to get people back to work. I encouraged yesterday the Senate majority to permit appropriate amendments to this legislation. That's one reason I voted to proceed, of course, the understanding that we would have the opportunity to talk about this issue and debate it and offer amendments. One, I think, ought to be how we pay for it. And second, we ought to be able to deal with the underlying problem. You know, unemployment insurance is more of a Band-Aid, and we need to be sure that we're dealing with the underlying problem of a weak economy and the lack of jobs and the lack of a connection between the skills that are needed and the jobs that are available. Let's really get at this problem in a serious way. I'll be frank, I heard from a lot of people in the last 24 hours after the vote on the motion to proceed that they were surprised that I voted to proceed and that other Republicans did as well, because they thought Republicans would all vote against it. And in fact, I saw some press reports this morning indicating that some of the Democratic leadership would have been happier had that motion failed last night, because then they could say, well, we're blaming Republicans for being obstructionists. I don't think my colleagues who voted the other way were being obstructionists. I think their concern was that they weren't going to have the opportunity to debate this issue and to offer amendments that are sensible, that are relevant to the issue at hand, like how we pay for it and how we improve unemployment insurance so it works better for those who are unemployed. But anyway, for my part, I took my colleagues at their word when they said they're serious about actually improving unemployment insurance and taking serious steps to deal with the lack of growth and economic opportunity in our economy today. So in good faith, I voted on this motion to proceed yesterday, hoping again that we would be willing here in this body to have real debate, which is what the Senate is supposed to be about, have a debate over the long-term, fiscally sound way forward on unemployment. So I've come to the floor today and in an effort to be sure that people understand there are alternatives out there, offer a specific idea to pay for the unemployment insurance, one that deals with fraud and abuse, one that's out of the president's budget, actually, one that should be bipartisan. I've heard earlier today some have come to the floor on the other side of the aisle and said, we shouldn't pay for this extension. You know, we should just go further into debt and deficit. My question would be, if we can pay for it, why wouldn't we? You know, why would we want to take the country further into deficit this year, bust the budget caps that we just established in the budget agreement? And I was one of 9 Republicans who voted for that budget agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it set up a process going forward where we can get back to our constitutional duties here in the United States Senate of actually appropriating, meaning the oversight necessary on the federal departments and agencies has been nowhere for the last 4 years when we haven't had a budget, and then prioritizing spending. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's our constitutional responsibility. It also didn't raise taxes. It also does have a little bit of deficit reduction, not as much as it should have. It wasn't perfect, but it enabled us to move forward. So I voted for that budget, and now we're talking about, right after that, putting forward an unemployment emergency extension that is not paid for, that will bust those very caps. I'm told a budget point of order is going to lie against this because of it. Well, that's not the way we should go. Let's pay for it. The debt and deficit is affecting our economy today. It's like a wet blanket over the economy. You can't have trillion-dollar deficits year in and year out. This year it's $680 billion. People are saying, oh, that's great. Are you kidding? It's the 5th highest deficit in the history of our country. And it all adds up to a $17 trillion debt, unprecedented. Now, I believe that's understated, given all the liabilities we have as a government. But the point is, we have never had debts of this level. They're historic levels. And it is not only the wrong thing to do for our economy today and to help getting people back to work, but it's also clearly unfair to do to future generations. Got some young people on the floor tonight or this afternoon, and it's, I think, even immoral that we're leaving this to them. So let's pay for this. I was glad to hear Senator Reid say yesterday of our efforts to fund this legislation, quote, "If they come with something serious, I'll talk to them," end quote. Well, I've got something serious, and I think other members will as well. Something that reflects, in my case, reforms proposed in the President's own budget, ideas that should be bipartisan. My amendment would close a loophole that opens the system to double dipping. And what do I mean by that? It's called concurrent receipts, where somebody's getting one federal program and then another federal program they shouldn't be eligible for if they've got the first one. Specifically, people who are both on Social Security disability insurance, meaning they can't work, SSDI, and also receiving funds from unemployment insurance, which means you're looking for a job or you're working. We also add trade adjustment assistance. It's exactly the same theory. We shouldn't allow double dipping. In fact, we should stop this abuse. This is in the President's budget. This reform makes sense. Social Security disability was designed to help people who are unable to work because of a serious medical condition. And as we all know, the law requires those on unemployment insurance to actively seek out job opportunities. So, the two don't work together. Let's stop the double dipping. These two programs are mutually exclusive. Now, those who can't work should be on disability. Those who can work should be on unemployment insurance if they're eligible. By passing this simple amendment, we can close this loophole and save $5.4 billion, almost enough to pay for the entire 3-month extension that we're talking about on the table here today. It's about $6.3 billion. In addition, I'll be adding another provision to my amendment that takes the unemployment insurance program integrity provisions directly out of the President's budget. So these are programs, again, in the President's budget to ensure that the unemployment insurance program is working properly, again, taking out the fraud and the abuse in it. The President's budget instructs the Department of Labor to implement it. My amendment does too. By implementing the President's own plan to reduce these improper payments and speed reemployment, we save even more money in the long run. And this pays for, again, this unemployment extension over 3 months. So I hope we can pass my amendment, pay for this extension, and show that this legislation is not just about politics. What we're talking about here on the floor today is not just about politics. It's about actually helping people who are unemployed to get back to work. I hope when my Democratic colleagues say they're ready to take real action on getting our economy moving again and help Americans who are suffering, that they mean it. By the way, the fact we're having this debate, the fact that so many Americans are in need of long-term unemployment insurance, this in and of itself shows that something's not working. In fact, as we've talked about on this floor before, we are now at historic levels in terms of long-term unemployment, people who have been unemployed for more than 26 weeks. The approach taken by the administration and many of my colleagues here and in the other body to bring down unemployment and get the economy moving really can't be seen to have worked by their own standards. You recall that we had a stimulus package and it was said that unemployment would be far lower than it is today. So by their own standards, it just hasn't worked. If it had, we wouldn't be debating this today. We wouldn't be talking about the need for an extension on an emergency basis of unemployment insurance. We can't spend our way to prosperity, and that's what we tried to do, in my view, in the stimulus package, and that's one reason it hasn't worked. We certainly tried that over the last 5 years. If you look at what the government has done, we've spent trillions of dollars we didn't have. We've burdened the next generation with previously unimaginable debt levels, as we talked about earlier. We've now run 5 years of historic deficits, 5 years. $1 trillion deficits the first 4 years. Before this administration, we'd never had a $1 trillion deficit. Last year's deficit, again, $680 billion, fifth largest in history, is certainly no cause for celebration. Particularly when the Congressional Budget Office tells us that we're going to go back to $1 trillion deficits within 10 years. So we obviously have a huge problem in terms of our debt and deficit. What do we have to show for all the spending that we did? 71 months after the recession began, the economy is still not recovered the jobs we lost in that recession. This has never happened in the history of our country. We've never had a recovery this week. We're down 1.3 million jobs. By comparison, we were up 10.4 million jobs at this point after the 1981-82 recession. That recession was also deep. In fact, it was deeper if you measure it by the number of people who were unemployed. Ronald Reagan came in and, frankly, he took pro-growth policies and put them in place, and it helped to create millions of jobs. By this time, we were up 10.4 million jobs after that recession. We were up 9.8 million jobs after the 1990 recession at this point. We were up 4.8 million jobs after the 2001 recession. Remember, that recovery was called the jobless recovery. Again, we haven't even gained back to jobs at all yet after this recession. We were up 4.8 million jobs at this point after the 2001 recession. Making matters even worse, 1 out of every 3 unemployed persons have been out of work for 27 weeks or longer. As I said, this rate of long-term unemployment is at levels we haven't seen. You'd think we would learn a lesson here in Washington. You would think that Washington would want to do something differently. And yet I heard the President and the Majority Leader just yesterday present an unemployment extension as if it were some kind of economic panacea, the silver bullet, justifying their failure to pay for this extension with all the growth they say it will generate. Well, the Senate Majority Leader said yesterday, and I quote, "For every dollar we spend on unemployment benefits, it gets $1.50 back to us just like that." Just like that? Think about this. If unemployment benefits create so much growth, why would we just do a 3-month extension? Why not a 3-year extension? Why would there be any limit? Money may not grow on trees, but apparently in the eyes of some, it grows from government programs. That's just not how the economy works. I know there are economists out there you can cite for just about anything, but the President's own economic advisors have written that unemployment benefits slow down the search for jobs. But we don't need to get into a battle of experts here. History has proven that just spending more money, even on unemployment benefits, is not the solution. It's not the long-term serious solution to the problems we face as a country. This extension, if it passes, will be the 11th time we've extended unemployment benefits in the last 5 years. These extensions have cost more than $200 billion. No economic boom has resulted from this spending, just as it didn't result, as I said earlier, from the $1 trillion in stimulus money. If spending were the answer, we wouldn't be standing here today having this debate. We'd be celebrating full employment. Mr. President, our economy would not be better off if we had higher unemployment and we were paying out more in unemployment benefits. And that's kind of the logical extension of what has been argued on the other side as to why we can't pay for this. I can't imagine anyone actually believes this. Yet for too long we've treated government spending as if it does create wealth. But if I take $1 from you, take $1 from one person, and give that dollar to somebody else, that other person may be better off, but I didn't add a dollar to the economy. Government programs have to come from somewhere. So that dollar is being taken from somewhere, given to somebody else, and somehow the notion is that's going to add to the economy. Again, the logical extension is let's just continue to provide more and more government spending. Everything will be great. That's not how it works. Dividing the pie up differently doesn't create more pie. It creates real, concrete, pro-growth policies to do that. Policies that mean we're paying out less in unemployment benefits because more people have the skills they need to get good jobs. That's what we ought to be talking about. Yes, I'm willing to extend unemployment insurance and pay for it. But during that period, let's come up with a better unemployment insurance program that actually connects people to the jobs that are out there. Because there are a lot of jobs that require skills that are not being filled. And the unemployment system ought to both, for long-term and even for the short-term, focus on that. How do you create better skills so that people have the opportunity, have the tools to be able to access those jobs? Policies that allow more companies and small businesses to produce quality products they can sell here and around the world. Creating better jobs in the process would help. Implementing these kind of policies are not as easy as extending unemployment benefits for a few months or raising the minimum wage. We won't be able to ram these kind of policies through in a week on a party line vote with no debate and no amendments, but they're the real solution to the chronic unemployment we're seeing in our states. And they're the only way to encourage the kind of income mobility that will close the income gap, not by tearing people down, but by bringing people up. Pro-growth economic policies obviously need to be part of the solution here. If we extend unemployment insurance, we should do so because people are hurting as a result of the failed policies of Washington. But we shouldn't kid ourselves into believing that this extension alone will somehow solve these economic problems. And again, it certainly won't pay for itself. As I said earlier, you can't take a dollar away from one person, give it to someone else, and create more purchasing power. You're redistributing that across the economy. It doesn't have to be that way. We can pass these pay-for amendments. I've got my own amendments, as I said. Others have also proposed their amendments. I know Senator Ayotte has an amendment that I'm supporting that, again, gets at fraud and abuse in government programs to say, let's pay for the unemployment benefits. She also, by the way, pays for veterans' benefits that were cut during the budget agreement that we just passed. I also support that. And she has a little left over for actual deficit reduction. Senator Coburn's going to have a proposal out here. I think Senator Hatch will have one. Senator McConnell will have one. My understanding is that Senator Coburn has one that also is out of the president's budget. So there are plenty of ideas out there as to how to pay for this extension short term, while we look at better ways to have the unemployment insurance system work to connect people who are unemployed to the jobs that are out there by giving them the skills that they need. That's where the hard work begins. We've got to get this country moving again. We've got to do things to actually increase economic growth and give people the skills that they need to access the jobs that are out there. We need to pass bills like the Career Act. That's bipartisan legislation I've introduced with Senator Mike Bennett from Colorado. In Ohio, we've got about 400,000 people unemployed, and we're told there are about 100,000 jobs right now open in Ohio. Now, a lot of these jobs are high-tech jobs. Some are in advanced manufacturing. Some are in bioscience. Some are in information technology. And we need to be sure that the people who are unemployed get the skills they need to be able to take advantage of those jobs, those opportunities. We can also start by working on tax reform. Everybody in this chamber talks about it. Let's do it. Corporate tax reform alone would result in a lot more revenue coming into the federal government by repatriating profits, and it would help expand opportunities, not for the boardroom, but for people who work in those companies. People have looked at this at the Congressional Budget Office. The economic experts have said if we did corporate business tax reform, over 70% of the benefit goes right to the workers. Higher pay, higher benefits. It's time to do these sorts of things to ensure that we have a growing economy. We are growing that pie, not just carving it up. Let's streamline the way we do regulations in this country. Currently, the United States ranks 34th in the world for the time it takes to get a government green light to actually build something. Think about that. This is a key World Bank measure for ease of doing business. We want America to be at the top of that list, not halfway down that list. Unless we do that, we're not going to see the kind of investment we want in this country. How many jobs are lost every year because people can't get a permit, that a good idea can't be built? These are jobs that are there if we change the policies here in Washington, D.C. Congress continues to pat itself on the back for scoring political points rather than taking on these challenges that face our country. I can tell you who's not patting us on the back. It's the American people. They aren't happy. They aren't pleased with our progress, and there's good reason. They're actually seeing their take-home pay go down as the deficit goes up and as the President talks about a better economy. 50 years ago, the United States declared a war on poverty, and yet poverty is still a major problem. The goal was noble, but the tools we used were not up to the challenge. Since the recession began, 9 million more Americans have fallen into poverty, and the median household income is down more than 8%. Poverty rates have actually increased during this administration with the policies we've got. It's time for a change.